You're hunched over a cluttered desk, the kind where ink stains never really dry and every drawer creaks like it's morning. The window beside you rattles with a breeze that smells faintly of coal smoke and damp leaves. You're not anyone particularly famous. Not a poet, not a soldier, not even a politician. Just a chemist. A quiet, rather mild-mannered one, in fact, one who goes by the name Luke Howard. You've got a headache, probably from the fumes of whatever mixture boiled too long in the glassware earlier. But your eyes keep drifting up, past the fogged window, into the sky. It's December 1802, and London's weather, in its usual unfussy way, is throwing a bit of everything at you. Mist, drizzle, a curious patch of sunshine, then back to gloom. The clouds shift like lazy stagehands behind a scrim, changing the mood with each entrance. Howard isn't what you'd call a man of sweeping ambition. He's not trying to conquer empires or write sonnets. He's a Quaker with a love for order and nature, both of which the sky seems to lack entirely. And yet he's drawn to it. There's something about clouds that teases his scientific brain. So many shapes, so many moods. They drift and swirl, appear and vanish, like thoughts that forgot to finish. You reach for a notebook. The pages are wrinkled, watermarked, smudged with soot from that time you left it too close to the stove. But no matter. You write something tentative. Cirrus? It means curl of hair, in Latin, delicate, wispy strands. The word feels right. Then another, cumulus, heaped. Stratus, layered. You're naming clouds now. You. A guy who just wanted to study pharmacy. Historians still argue whether Howard truly invented the system or just formalized what others mumbled about at weather clubs. But no one before him ever tried this hard to make the sky behave like a taxonomy chart. Others had tried poetic metaphors. But Howard, he used Latin. That's commitment. And he didn't stop there. He gave combinations too. Cirrostratus, stratocumulus. It's like cloud Pokemon, but gentler. Each formation with a backstory, a little family tree. There's a beautiful absurdity in it. Naming the unnamable. Trying to pin Latin roots onto vapor. It's the 19th century equivalent of organizing your sock drawer by mood. This wasn't his full-time job, by the way. Howard ran a pharmaceutical company. He had a real profession. But in stolen moments between measuring apothecary weights and balancing ledgers, he climbed rooftops and peered skyward. Sometimes he'd host informal talks. Just a few people in a rented room, listening politely as he gestured at charcoal sketches and said things like, "Notice the lumpy cumuliform character. You sip weak tea, the kind that's mostly hot water, and glance out the window again. The clouds have shifted. They always do. But you feel oddly satisfied. You've made sense of something no one else bothered to wrangle. Not for fame, not for money. Just because it bothered you that no one had done it yet. And yet, outside your study, the world keeps not caring. Most people ignore clouds unless they threaten a picnic or block a parade. But you? You give them names. You give them dignity. Somewhere in France, a very short man with very big ambitions will hear about this and become weirdly obsessed. But that's later. For now, you're just Luke Howard. Just a man with a pen, a sky, and a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, naming things brings them closer to being understood. You're standing in a crowded hall now, somewhere you never expected to be. Paris. Not physically, of course. You're still very much in England, probably still trying to get the smell of sulfur out of your sleeves. But word of your cloud names, your humble little Latin classifications, has crossed the channel. And oddly enough, they've landed right in the lap of Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, that Napoleon. The conqueror, the lawmaker, the self-crowned emperor with a fondness for military charts and unusually small chairs. He's reading about your clouds. The ones you watched roll over London rooftops while trying not to slip on pigeon droppings. The man who redrew the map of Europe is now utterly captivated by cumulus. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's fascination was scientific or strategic, or just one of those curious tangents his mind occasionally ran off with, like Egypt or bees. But letters and accounts confirm it. He was genuinely interested in meteorology. And more specifically in your work, Luke. Your names. Imagine that. You're used to being met with polite nods or sleepy applause. Then one day, someone mentions that the most powerful man in Europe has taken an interest in how you label atmospheric moisture. No pressure. Napoleon, as it happens, had an obsession with systematizing things. He loved order, hierarchy, control. Whether it was the military, law, or hairstyles, everything needed a structure. So when someone told him about this English chemist who had gone and classified the clouds into a neat Latin-named system, well, that was basically the meteorological equivalent of handing him a perfectly sharpened saber. You imagine him, perhaps during a rare quiet moment between battles, staring at the sky from a battlefield tent, trying to decide whether that overhead veil was stratus or cirrostratus. Did he argue with his advisors about it? Did he ever bark, "No, fool"? That's clearly a cumulus congestus. You sincerely hope so. It would have appealed to his need for predictability in an unpredictable world. Armies can be disciplined. Maps can be drawn. But the sky? That's chaos. Unless, of course, you give it names. And it wasn't just a passing fancy. French scientists picked up your classification and began incorporating it into their studies. A version of your work was translated, circulating among intellectuals. Your ideas caught fire. Not a blaze, but the kind of quiet, steady burn that changes the temperature of a room without anyone noticing. Now, you didn't invent meteorology. People had been trying to forecast the weather for centuries, usually badly. But you brought clarity. Simplicity. You took a fleeting, formless thing and gave it structure. That's not just science. That's art. That's philosophy. That's French. Of course, back in England, you're still mostly just that pharmacist with the cloud hobby. But there's a peculiar satisfaction in knowing your ideas are now drifting through Europe like the clouds themselves, carried not by wind, but by words. Latin ones, no less. It's a strange thought, Napoleon and you connected not by war or rivalry or royal decrees, but by shared curiosity. You wonder if he ever knew your name. Not just the Englishman, but Luke Howard, the man who catalogued clouds. Somewhere in Paris, someone is sketching a weather chart inspired by your system. Somewhere else, a science student is practicing your terms with a French accent. You don't hear these echoes, but they're happening. Your quiet work is making noise. And while it's unlikely Napoleon ever sent you a thank you note, wouldn't that have been something? The legacy is real. Your words took root in a language he respected. Your system fit into the orderly universe he tried so hard to build, all because you once looked up, saw a heap of vapor, and thought, cumulus. You're back on your rooftop again, same rickety ladder, same view of damp chimney stacks poking through a gray London sky. The air smells like wet slate and yesterday's coal fire. You tug your coat tighter, trying to ignore the growing suspicion that this whole cloud naming thing might be just a little too ambitious. Because here's the thing, the clouds don't seem to care what you call them. They shift without warning. One moment they're plump and piled like whipped meringue, cumulus, obviously. But wait 10 minutes and they're suddenly thinning, stretching, losing their character. Are they cirrus now? Or have they evaporated into something else entirely? You squint, rub your eyes. Maybe they're cumulostratus? Stratocirrus? Is that even a thing? It's one of those days where your beautifully Latin labels start to feel like loose buttons on a coat too small for the weather. You sigh and scratch a few notes in your journal, the ink barely legible under your numb fingers. Still, you persist. Because even if the system doesn't always make perfect sense, it's better than what came before. Before you, weather watchers relied on vague, poetic metaphors. Clouds were Mara's tails, mackerel skies, or angel's breath. Lovely stuff, but not especially helpful if you're trying to record humidity levels or teach a student how to tell rain's on the way. So you look to Latin, a dead language, yes, but one that never argued back. Historians still argue whether your naming system was scientifically sound or just a convenient set of visual metaphors. Modern meteorologists debate your categories like philosophers picking apart Plato. Some say your cirrostratus overlaps too much with altostratus. Others insist nimbostratus should have been renamed years ago. And don't even mention cumulonimbus at a weather symposium unless you want a fistfight in the fog machine aisle. But despite all the debates, despite the fraying edges of your Latin grid, something amazing has happened. People are actually using your words. Painters, poets, sailors, and yes, even schoolteachers. You overhear someone in a park say, "Looks like cumulus today," and for a second, your heart does a little jig. You don't correct them even though it's clearly stratocumulus. Let them have the moment, because here's the secret you've learned from all your sky watching. The clouds don't have to be precisely classified to be seen. The system is not about boxing in beauty, it's about inviting people to notice it, and you keep refining. You jot down when cirrus appear before a storm. You sketch diagrams that show how one form transitions into another. You even try your hand at watercolor, not because you're good at it, but because sometimes ink can't quite capture how thin and delicate a cloud can look when the sun hits it sideways. Your study becomes a little museum of the ephemeral. Drawings, Notes, pressed leaves, empty teacups. A whole life lived between observations. And still, the clouds keep changing. Sometimes you wonder, what if someone finds your notes 100 years from now and thinks, well, he tried his best? Would that be enough? And honestly, yes. Because even if you didn't get every name right, even if Cirrostratus ends up meaning something completely different in the future, what you did was look up. Carefully. Repeatedly. With wonder. You didn't just name the clouds. You honored them. You're walking through London now, your boots echoing on damp cobblestones, a folded notebook tucked beneath your arm. The sky above is its usual shade of indecisive. Part pewter, part milk, part maybe it'll clear by tea time. You glance up instinctively. Stratocumulus. Probably, though there's a bit of wispy edge that makes you pause. A cirrus flirtation at best. You pass a lamplighter at work, his ladder wobbling as he reaches for the flickering glass hood. He hums a tune with no discernible rhythm, his mind clearly elsewhere, possibly on supper, or the girl in Brixton with the laugh like a dropped teacup. He doesn't look up. Most people don't. But you've built a whole philosophy out of glancing skyward. Luke Howard, reluctant philosopher. You didn't start this to change how people think. And yet, slowly, a few of them are beginning to look at clouds differently. There's a curious comfort in your names. Familiarity where there was once vagueness. People like categories, it turns out, even if they don't admit it. Your cloud system is the perfect blend of tidy and poetic. At lectures, yes, you've been giving those now, you notice the peculiar quiet that falls when you show your drawings. Not silence out of boredom, but something softer. A lull of attention. It's almost reverent. Perhaps it's because clouds have always felt untouchable. Unreachable. But with your system, you've offered people a way to feel just a little closer to the sky. You still work full-time as a chemist. You're still balancing ledgers, boiling tinctures, and trying not to breathe in anything that fizzes spontaneously. But there's a subtle shift in your reputation. You're now the Cloud Man. Not exactly a title that commands instant awe at a dinner party, but enough to make people tilt their heads thoughtfully when your name is mentioned. Historians still argue whether you considered yourself a scientist, a philosopher, or merely a curious observer. You never published under any grand institutional banner. You weren't knighted. You didn't hold a professorship, but you did write a paper on the modification of clouds, and it quietly wove its way through the scientific societies of Europe. In it, you didn't just list the names. You described the life cycle of clouds. You observed how they formed, evolved, and dispersed. You introduced the idea that clouds weren't fixed shapes but dynamic processes. It was revolutionary in its gentleness. You weren't trying to dominate nature. You were trying to understand it, and people noticed. Not just the scientists. Artists too. One painter in particular, a young romantic with more hair than sense, scribbled your cloud types into the margins of his sketchbook. He'd spend hours trying to match your words to the skies in his landscapes. Whether you knew it or not, you'd inspired a generation that saw beauty in observation. You'd made weather lyrical. One morning, a colleague stops you in the street and asks, half joking, whether you think clouds have personalities. You smile politely, say something suitably humble. But in your heart, absolutely. Cumulus is boisterous. Stratus is melancholy. Cirrus is a daydreamer. You keep these thoughts mostly to yourself. The world still expects scientists to be practical, not poetic. But every so often in your journal, you write things like, alto stratus, thin light like melancholy lace. Wind in retreat. Not scientific, perhaps, but truthful in a way numbers often aren't. Because here's what you're starting to realize, naming the clouds wasn't about defining them. It was about noticing them. And once you notice a thing, truly notice it, it changes you. So you walk home beneath a thick, sweeping canopy of stratus. It's dull, yes, but also gentle. A sky like wool. You pull your coat tighter, feel a few lazy drops on your collar, and think, yes, stratus. Definitely. You're back indoors now, the faint scent of candle-wax and chalk dust curling through the air. The fire crackles half-heartedly in the grate as you sit at your modest writing desk, ink-stained fingers hovering above a fresh sheet of paper. Outside, rain taps steadily against the window, a polite kind of downpour, persistent but not especially dramatic. Perfect weather for Cirrostratus. You dip your pen and begin drafting a letter. Not a scientific one this time, but something a little more personal. You've received a message from a gentleman in Leipzig who claims your cloud classifications have changed the way he teaches young naturalists. He asks if you might consider a short correspondence. You reread his elegant script, smiling at the phrase, "The sky is no longer chaos, but a language." You can't help but chuckle. If only he knew how many times you've questioned that language yourself. How often a cloud has taunted you by refusing to fit the mold. But still, there's pride in it. You reply with modesty but warmth. You mention your observations, the ongoing refinements, the fact that the sky continues to surprise you. Historians still argue whether your cloud classifications were more observational than theoretical, whether you captured truth or merely imposed it. But in this moment, sitting by a sputtering fire, you realize that for many, the distinction doesn't matter. People are using your system to see. That's enough. Later that evening, you lecture once more, this time at the Royal Institution. The hall is stiff with starch and expectation. You adjust your waistcoat and step up to the podium. A room full of men who expect chemistry, equations, gravitas. And yet, you begin by pointing to the ceiling, then the sky just beyond it. You describe the fluidity of clouds. The way cumulus can rise like a cathedral in the morning, only to collapse by tea. You speak of transition states, how clouds rarely stay put, how no label is permanent. Some in the audience frown as if you'd insulted their ledgers. Others lean forward, intrigued. You feel the room shift subtly like the first breeze before a front rolls in. You quote Goethe, yes, the Goethe who once wrote a poem inspired by your clouds. Luke Howard, he said, has classified the sky. You didn't set out to impress the German literary elite, but here you are, in footnotes and stanzas. The romantic poets love your work. Shelley, Wordsworth, Byron. They swoon over your atmospheric insights like lovesick students with a crush on humidity. It's surreal. Your Latin labels have found their way into verse. You walk home after the lecture in a light mist, your shoes collecting puddles like forgotten debts. A dog barks once, then goes silent. Overhead, the clouds are low and moody, nimbostratus, with the faint promise of drizzle. And yet, in that grayness, you feel calm. The beauty of clouds, you've come to learn, is that they exist outside human vanity. They couldn't care less about applause, fame, or formal titles. They'll roll across a king's crown just the same as a pauper's grave. You're simply there to watch, to wonder, and maybe occasionally to name. Back at home, you sit once more at your desk. You glance at the paper you were working on before the lecture, a chart showing transitional states between cumulus and stratocumulus. You've added small arrows hand-drawn with care. It's fiddly work, but it feels oddly sacred, because you're not just sketching shapes. You're capturing impermanence, giving form to the fleeting, writing a soft little hymn to change. It's a clear morning for once. The kind of morning where even London seems to hum a little softer. You lean against the worn rail of a footbridge, notebook in hand, gaze angled skyward like it always is these days. Above you, cumulus clouds march steadily in formation, fluffy, self-important, like they're on parade. There's a light breeze tugging at your sleeves and the distant sound of a horse's hooves clattering over cobbles. You jot down a few notes, sketch the edges of a particularly stubborn cloud that refuses to morph into anything convenient. Is it cumulus? Stratocumulus? You can't decide, and frankly, the cloud doesn't care. It floats on, indifferent to classification, content to just be. Still, you keep sketching. That's when a boy approaches you, 10 at most, with freckles and a crooked cap. He peers over your shoulder, eyes wide. Are you drawing the sky? He asks, as if it's the strangest thing he's ever heard. You nod. He squints upward. Looks like a sheep to me. And honestly, he's not wrong. You chuckle, tell him that's exactly what cumulus clouds look like, big, woolly sheep in the sky. He beams like you've handed him a secret. Then he runs off, arms flapping, a tiny Icarus chasing cloud flocks no shepherd could contain. You stand there for a moment longer, warmed by something you can't quite name, because now even children are noticing. Historians still argue whether your real legacy lies in science or education. You didn't invent meteorology, and you certainly weren't the only one trying to bring order to the sky. But what you did do was give people a way to talk about what they see without needing a degree or a telescope. You made the sky personal, and in return, people began writing to you. Farmers curious about frost patterns. Artists requesting descriptions of twilight formations. Even a sailor from Barbados who swears he predicted a storm based on a pattern you once described in a lecture. Your inbox, well, your mantelpiece, is cluttered with letters, sketches, even a homemade barometer someone swore by. You read them all. Carefully. Gratefully. Sometimes twice. At dinner parties now, you're introduced with an odd reverence. This is Mr. Howard. He classified the clouds. You try not to wince when someone confuses cumulus with cumulonimbus, but you smile anyway. This progress. Language takes time to settle into people's mouths. Meanwhile, your day job rolls on. Chemistry still pays the bills after all. You spend your hours measuring compounds, boiling tinctures, weighing powders with hands far steadier than your internal weather. But even here, clouds sneak in. You compare vapor trails to condensation reactions. You describe crystal formations in the language of cirrostratus. Your colleagues raise eyebrows, but secretly, some of them start looking up too. You begin to suspect you've started something bigger than yourself. One afternoon, you're invited to meet a group of natural philosophers, weather-obsessed men with spectacles and eccentric walking sticks. They sit in a drawing room stuffed with maps and measuring tools, sipping weak tea, debating whether your cloud types should be expanded to include 12 categories instead of 10. Or possibly 16. You listen patiently. Offer a gentle correction here, a thoughtful there. But mostly, you marvel at the fact that people care this much about clouds. 10 years ago, no one even thought they were worth naming. Yeah? There's a movement. Later that evening, alone in your room, you unroll a large chart you've been working on. It shows the progression of cloud types based on atmospheric conditions, humidity, temperature, wind patterns. There are arrows, annotations, and a few doodles in the margin you're mildly embarrassed about. It's messy, imperfect, but it's yours. And you think, maybe naming clouds isn't about precision. Maybe it's about connection. About saying, I see this too. I recognize it. Because that's the real magic of your work. You've made the sky familiar, so you label one last sketch before bed. Blow out the candle and slip under your blanket. Outside, a lazy fog curls around the lampposts. Probably radiation fog, you think sleepily. The kind that hugs the ground, soft and unassuming. Like a bedtime story told in mist. You close your eyes. The fog doesn't lift for 3 days. You wake each morning to the same soft gray hush. The kind of silence that wraps around your senses like a woolen scarf. Even the birds seem quieter, their calls muffled, tentative. The windows weep condensation. The air tastes like yesterday's tea, damp and lingering. But to you, it's a delight. Radiation fog, you decide again with a pinch of smugness. The kind that forms when the ground cools after sunset, releasing moisture into the still night air. You love how local it is, how it settles in low places like a sleepy guest who can't quite be bothered to leave. It's a humble weather pattern, one that doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. Much like yourself, you dress slowly, layers against the chill, and take your tea standing by the window. Through the mist, chimneys puff like little factories of thought. The world is a pencil sketch, blurry at the edges. You raise a hand, press your palm to the glass. Cold. Predictable. Beautiful. You spend the morning updating your cloud diary. Yes, you still keep one, now several volumes deep. Each entry a timestamp of the sky. You've begun including mood notes too, not just weather data. You describe how the fog makes the street lamps glow like candles at a vigil. You write about the way cirrus clouds tease sunshine but never quite deliver. Some might call this poetic excess. You call it honesty. Historians still argue whether your notebooks were intended for publication or simply personal ramblings. They're filled with precise measurements alongside flights of fancy. On one page, barometric pressure to 2 decimal places. On the next, stratocumulus today like a rumpled blanket after a restless night. You aren't writing for posterity. You're writing because clouds deserve witnesses. In the afternoons, you take long walks through Hampstead Heath, your boots squishing into frost-soft ground. The trees are skeletal now, winter having stolen their bravado. You like them this way. Honest. Stripped of pretense. Overhead, the clouds roll on, oblivious. One day you run into a fellow weather enthusiast. A young woman in a heavy wool coat and serious boots, sketchpad in hand. She introduces herself as Charlotte. No last name offered. She's trying to paint cloud transitions, she says, but keeps missing the shift. They never stay still, she sighs. You grin. That's the point. You end up walking together, exchanging favorite cloud types like old friends trading recipes. She likes cirrocumulus, calls them fish-scale skies. You admit a fondness for altostratus, with their sleepy light and ambiguous moods. She raises an eyebrow. Sounds like projection. You both laugh. Later, over a paper-wrapped meat pie and 2 cups of overly sugared tea, you show her one of your diagrams. She studies it for a long while, then murmurs, it's like you're trying to chart daydreams. You consider that. Maybe she's right. Back home, you mark the encounter in your diary. Met a painter today. She sees the sky in brushstrokes. Promising. You don't write that you admired her boots, or the way her questions didn't end with question marks. But you think about it. A week later, she sends you a small watercolor in the post. Cirrocumulus over a cricket field. Gentle pastels. A note for the man who gave clouds names. You hang it in your study. The days grow shorter, the light thinning like a fading candle flame. Autumn's breath turns colder, bringing a faint bite to the air that forces you to draw your scarf tighter and walk a little faster. Yet your devotion to the sky remains unchanged. Every morning, before the city stirs to life, you are outside watching, sketching, cataloging. One morning, as you trace the delicate patterns of cirrostratus, a peculiar thought strikes you. What if clouds were more than just weather phenomena? What if, instead, they were messages? Silent communications written in vapor and wind, waiting for someone patient enough to decipher them? The idea isn't entirely new. You've read enough folklore and poetry to know that clouds have long been symbols, omens, even gods. But you, armed with your meticulous observations and Latin labels, begin to see clouds as a language between earth and sky, nature's own Morse code. This perspective adds a layer of meaning to your work, turning scientific classification into a form of quiet storytelling. And yet, you don't share this with many. The scientific community prefers facts over flights of fancy, data over dreams. So, you keep this thought tucked away like a secret. Historians still argue whether this poetic framing was your intention or a later romantic addition. Your personal journals hint at it, but your public writings remain formal, grounded in measurement and observation. Meanwhile, your cloud catalog gains attention abroad. Correspondence trickles in from weather watchers in India, Egypt, and Brazil, curious about your system and eager to adapt it to their skies. This global interest surprises you. After all, clouds don't recognize borders or empires, they drift free, indifferent to human divisions. One letter stands out. A beautifully penned note from a woman in Cairo, describing how your cloud names help her navigate the desert's fierce and fickle weather. She writes of cirrostratus veils that promise rare rain, and cumulonimbus towers like storm gods. Her words resonate with a blend of respect and affection. You file her letter carefully, feeling a kinship across continents and climates. Back in London, you're invited to present your cloud classifications to the Royal Society. The hall buzzes with anticipation and polite skepticism. You stand at the podium feeling the weight of expectation settle on your shoulders. But as you begin describing the forms, movements, and moods of clouds, the room quiets. You speak of the cycles of moisture, temperature, and air currents, the invisible forces shaping the sky's ever-changing canvas. You mention how clouds can signal rain, storms, or clear weather, linking your observations to practical concerns of sailors, farmers, and merchants. Your words paint pictures, gentle yet vivid, inviting listeners to look up with fresh eyes. After the talk, a group of scholars approaches you, peppering you with questions about atmospheric pressure, condensation nuclei, and cloud formation theories. You answer patiently, admitting the limits of your knowledge. Historians still debate how much your work influenced the emerging science of meteorology versus remaining a poetic classification. You return home that evening, tired but fulfilled. The sky outside is a deep indigo, speckled with stars hidden behind wisps of cirrus clouds. You feel a sense of quiet accomplishment. Naming the clouds, you realize, was never just about science. It was about connection between observer and nature, between people and the vast sky overhead. You've given the world a gentle vocabulary for the fleeting, a way to slow down and appreciate the beauty that drifts above us all. You close your journal, the faint scent of ink mingling with the cool night air, and prepare for sleep under a soft, cloudy ceiling. Winter settles in fully now, and the days grow shorter, the sky a perpetually overcast canvas of soft gray. You find comfort in this muted world, the clouds above more consistent, predictable in their shrouding embrace. It's a time for reflection, for quiet moments by the fire with your notebooks spread across the table. Your thoughts drift to how clouds, much like people, have distinct personalities. Some are boisterous and changeable, like the towering cumulonimbus that bring thunder and rainstorms. Others are calm and steady, like the lingering stratus that hug the ground and soften the edges of the world. You note a peculiar trend among your correspondents. Many report that watching clouds helps ease anxiety and restless nights. It's as if the sky's slow, rhythmic dance has a gentle hypnotic effect, a lullaby sung by the heavens. You chuckle softly, imagining the great Napoleon himself, perhaps lying back after a long day of campaigns, gazing up and finding some small peace in the cloud formations you so carefully described. Historians still argue whether he ever knew your name or if your cloud catalog remained a quiet undercurrent in his era's scientific circles. One particularly foggy morning, you receive a letter from an English sailor newly returned from the Caribbean. He writes of vivid cloud formations over tropical seas, billowing cumulonimbus that tower like castles, and wispy cirrus that stretch endlessly across the horizon. He thanks you for helping him recognize these signs and prepare for storms that might otherwise catch him unawares. This connection between far-flung worlds, brought together by clouds, feels deeply satisfying. You imagine those sailors tracing the same sky patterns you do, thousands of miles apart, bound by a shared sky language. Your evenings are spent experimenting with new ways to illustrate your classifications. You dabble with watercolor sketches, trying to capture the softness of a cirrostratus veil or the texture of altocumulus clouds. Your hands, more accustomed to pen and ink, fumble at times, but the effort pleases you. One night, a sudden snowstorm blankets London. The world outside your window is transformed into a silent white wilderness. The clouds seem to have descended, wrapping the city in their cold embrace. You write feverishly, documenting the transition from rain clouds to snow clouds, fascinated by the science and poetry of it all. As you write, a gentle warmth spreads through you. Despite the chill outside, inside your study glows with the quiet energy of discovery and connection. The sky, you think, is a living canvas, forever shifting and inspiring. And you, in your small way, are its humble interpreter. Spring sneaks in quietly like a whispered promise beneath the lingering clouds. The cold loosens its grip and you notice the sky growing lighter, thinner, more translucent. The clouds begin to change too, shedding their heavy winter coats for the lighter garments of warmer days. You wander through the awakening city, breathing in the scent of damp earth and blossoming flowers. Above, the clouds flirt with the sun, puffs of cumulus drifting lazily against a blue backdrop, occasionally interrupted by wisps of cirrus like delicate brushstrokes. Your notebooks fill with new observations and sketches. You find yourself fascinated by the way clouds evolve with the seasons, not just in form, but in feeling. Winter clouds feel like a quiet blanket. Spring clouds are a playful dance. You meet again with Charlotte, your painter friend, who has been capturing these transitions on canvas. Together, you discuss how the sky's moods mirror the city's slow awakening. She shows you a recent work, soft cumulus clouds reflected in a rain-soaked street, the colors muted but alive. You realize your catalog is more than just scientific documentation. It's a chronicle of change and resilience, a gentle reminder that everything, even the sky, moves through cycles. One afternoon, you visit the British Museum's meteorological collection, hoping to see some of the earliest weather instruments. You marvel at the old barometers, thermometers, and rain gauges, tools that helped people try to grasp the elusive patterns of the atmosphere. Historians still debate how much these instruments influenced your cloud classifications. Some say your work was a natural extension of technological progress. Others believe your poetic approach was a deliberate step back from cold measurement toward human connection. You pause before a display of ancient weather lore, objects once thought to influence or predict storms. Amulets, charms, and carved stones. You smile, recalling your own attempts to decode the sky's messages, not through superstition but observation. That evening, you and Charlotte host a small gathering of fellow cloud enthusiasts and local artists. Over tea and soft conversation, you share your latest discoveries, trading stories and sketches. The room hums with gentle excitement, the kind that comes from shared passion rather than urgency. You think about how your quiet work has created a community, a cloud circle of sorts, people who look up and find calm in the same shifting shapes. Later, alone in your study, you write in your journal. Clouds are a shared language, soft, ever-changing, and full of wonder. You close the book and watch the last light fade from the sky, feeling at peace. With the arrival of summer, the sky opens up in dramatic displays. Big, bold cumulus clouds tower like airy monuments over the city, casting moving shadows that play across cobbled streets and rooftop gardens. The air is warmer now, thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the faint tang of coal smoke. You're out nearly every day, sketching and scribbling, your cloud journal swelling with new entries. These summer skies are bolder, less reserved than their wintry predecessors. Clouds rise higher, shift faster, and the weather turns more theatrical. You can almost feel the atmosphere's mischief as it brews a thunderstorm behind what looked, moments ago, like a peaceful cumulus parade. You're particularly interested in the transition patterns, how a benign cumulus becomes a brewing cumulonimbus, the kind that could ruin a picnic or delay a postal carriage for hours. You begin tracking their speed and density, observing how changes in temperature and humidity create these towering, thunderous beasts. One afternoon, while walking past a market square, you overhear two vendors arguing about whether clouds can predict good fishing. You can't help but chime in, offering your opinion on how low-pressure systems and nimbostratus formations often accompany ideal conditions. They thank you, somewhat amused, and you walk away grinning. Your work is becoming more known, even among those outside academic circles. You get letters from countryside schoolteachers, sea captains, and even a Scottish shepherd who claims he's been naming his sheep after cloud types: Fluffy Cirrus, Moody Nimbo, and a particularly unpredictable you named cumulonimbus. Historians still argue whether your classifications were adopted as fast in rural areas as in the cities. Some say it took decades for farmers and fishermen to internalize the Latin terms, while others point to letters like these as evidence of surprisingly fast adoption, especially where weather mattered most. You're amused by this debate, but you know the truth is probably somewhere in between. People will always find ways to personalize the impersonal, Latin names or not. Meanwhile, the scientific community is beginning to stir. A young student from Edinburgh writes asking if you believe clouds are influenced more by altitude or moisture content. Another sends you sketches of formations over the Scottish Highlands, asking for help identifying what might be a rare form of lenticular cloud. You respond to each letter personally, often adding a light-hearted comment or a quick joke about the weather. You found your rhythm and with it a growing sense of purpose. Charlotte paints a series of summer skies based on your sketches, hanging them in a modest gallery. Visitors come and stand quietly before the canvases, eyes turned upward as if the ceiling itself might swirl into cumulus. You and Charlotte sit in the corner, sipping cool tea and watching people react to clouds that aren't even there. It strikes you again, this language you've created, this quiet way of interpreting the heavens has given people a new kind of peace. A new way to pause. That night, a summer storm breaks. Rain lashes against your windows, thunder rumbles distantly, and your room flashes briefly with silver light. You sit at your desk, wrapped in a blanket, and jot one last note in your journal. The clouds today were alive, like great sleeping animals stretching in the sky. They roared. They wept. And now they sleep again. You listen to the storm ease into silence, your heartbeat slow and steady as the world outside dissolves into gentle darkness. The summer storm has passed and the air smells fresh like soaked leaves, warm stone, and something faintly electric. You awaken to a sky rinsed clean, painted with delicate cirrostratus clouds that shimmer faintly in the morning light like gauze stretched across the heavens. The city, too, seems to exhale. Streets are washed, birds louder than usual, and neighbors step out onto stoops with cups of tea in hand, gazing upward as though the sky has reset itself. You find yourself reflecting more often these days, your entries growing more meditative. The clouds, once an academic obsession, now feel like companions, changing, yes, but always returning in familiar guises. You recognize them the way one recognizes a distant cousin in a crowd, different each time but undeniably kin. Your old mentor writes to you now, a rare letter filled with warmth and admiration. He confesses he once found your cloud pursuit quaint, perhaps even trivial, but now sees its depth, how naming the sky has helped people feel less at odds with it. He signs off, "Your clouds have taught us to look up with understanding, not fear." That evening, you return to an old rooftop you haven't visited in years. It's quieter up here now. The city has grown louder, faster, but the sky, bless it, remains unhurried. You lie back, staring up as high-altitude clouds glide in from the west. There's something different about them. A layered complexity. You note unusual formations, a crisscrossing of altocumulus and thin streaks of cirrus, their edges tinged with sunset gold. You recall a fringe theory you'd once read, positing that certain cloud patterns might be influenced by volcanic activity or even upper atmosphere dust from desert storms halfway around the world. Historians still argue whether these early speculations hinted at what we'd later understand as global weather systems. You don't know for sure, but the idea still delights you. You try to draw what you see, but the colors shift too quickly, the clouds too fluid. So you close your sketchbook and simply watch. You realize, not for the first time, that clouds are best appreciated in motion, like music. You can write it down, yes, but nothing captures the sound of a chord quite like hearing it played. As dusk deepens, Charlotte joins you. She's carrying 2 mugs of something hot, spiced cider, maybe. She sits beside you in silence, then says, I think the clouds are showing off for you tonight. You grin. They've earned it. For a while, you say nothing more. The sky turns lavender and then navy, with Venus blinking faintly through a gap in the stratus. The world below softens into quiet, just the hush of wind and distant city sounds muffled by twilight. You find your thoughts drifting. Past clouds, past the city, to the people who will someday lie on rooftops of their own, looking up and whispering Latin names you once jotted in a cramped notebook. They won't know your face, perhaps not even your name, but they'll look up with curiosity, maybe even peace. And that will be enough. You drain the last of your cider. The clouds have thickened now, closing in for night. No thunder, no storm, just a slow tuck-in by the sky itself. You and Charlotte head inside, footsteps soft on the rooftop tiles. Tomorrow will bring more clouds, more notes, more wonder. But for now, you're content to let the sky do what it does best, drift, darken, and disappear into the arms of sleep.